Welcome to TINAH Talks, where time is not a healer, but we believe that we all have the power to heal ourselves and take our mental well-being into our own hands. This podcast is a byproduct of TINAH, the mental well-being marketplace, a community platform at timeisnotahealer.com, providing you with the best products for your self-healing journey. Hit subscribe and follow us on socials if you want support on your mental well-being journey. We're your hosts. I'm Kelsey. This is Sophie. And this episode is all about grief and the different ways that we experience grief and the way that we handle it and the way that others handle it and all of that good stuff. So I guess like the first place to start is I think a lot of people don't really understand how widespread grief can be. A lot of people associate it with like the loss of a loved one, someone who's passed and died. But I think there are so many other areas of life where we grieve quite a bit, and I think they're all equally difficult in their own unique ways. Um, so what I'm thinking about here is right, like the loss of someone because there's death, the loss of a relationship because, it ended, or, whether that's like a personal relationship, intimate relationship, or with friends, having to cut off family, things like that, ends of chapters in our lives, right? Things, what you were doing when you were 20 years old is very different than when you were 30. And the transition to that is wild. I Identity loss, that's a whole nother thing that you have to grieve. And so, I don't know. I'd love to hear to start like what your experience with grief has been so far, Sophie.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken about this a little bit on a side note before we came on the podcast, because I feel like I have never, and I've got great, obviously, thankfully, up until this point, I'm 32 years old, I have never experienced like huge losses in my life. I have experienced the death of grandparents. I have experienced the breakdown of relationships, and I have gone through a hell of a lot of personal change in my life. But I still feel like I don't fully understand what grief actually is. And
Yeah.
I feel like I get it from a standpoint of like it's everything's it's essentially grief is a loss, right? Like you're mourning for a loss of something that's happened. But I feel like we've spoken about this before as well, like I default to a lot of the time, I default to logic when I go through something challenging, particularly, for example, losing a grandparent. Let's just give this as an example. I love my grandparents, don't get me wrong, like they were amazing. I actually spent most of my childhood at my nan and granddad's house 3 days a week, and like they basically took me to school every single day. Like I was very, very close to my granddad, who passed away in 2015 or 16, I can't remember exactly, but 8 years ago, let's say. And like the most amazing person ever, like absolutely loved him. But when he passed away, I don't get me wrong, I was obviously gutted. I was very sad, and it was like around my birthday, so it was all like, it was a very emotional time. And I actually lived in Italy at the time, and all my family and him lived in the UK, so it wasn't easy for me to just go and be with my family. I actually had to even take time off work to go back for the funeral and stuff. That was actually very challenging. But at the same time, after the initial feeling of emotion, sadness, and the sadness of it, kind of shock of it, like wore off, I started to logicalize it, is that a word, in my brain.
You started to logic it.
And I was kind of like, right, okay, but last time I saw my granddad, he was miserable. He really wasn't happy and enjoying his life. He wasn't very well. He was in and out of hospital, going to different appointments. The last time I actually saw him, I was taking him to hospital. Things like that. And I had a bit of a weird experience in the sense of when my granddad passed away, I knew it was happening because he came to me in my dream randomly. I've got a bit of a weird like connection with things like that. And like he came to me in my dream the week before, to the point where I actually texted my mum and was like, is granddad okay? And she's like, well, no, actually he's gone into hospital. So like I knew what was happening. I had a feeling that it was going to happen. So I'd almost like semi-prepared myself for the thing to happen. But then I went straight into logic mode. And it's not that I then didn't still feel the sadness, but like I could understand it, which I think helped me with the grief of that situation.
Right. Processing it.
Exactly. But then if I look at other situations where I felt grief, and like I said, I haven't experienced any other big losses in terms of death in my life. I've experienced breakdowns of relationships that I wasn't expecting to end. If I look at when I experienced the loss of those relationships, that was no logic whatsoever. That was me going crazy.
Like total emotion meltdown.
Emotions. Exactly. So I feel like I've got a really confused perception of what grief is. And I think that's only something that you maybe you learn as you go through more experience of that, like how your coping mechanisms of that and stuff like that. But I obviously know that you've obviously had some big losses in your life and you've experienced a lot of grief in your life. So I don't know if you want to share that from your perspective, because I imagine that our perspectives on that are very, very different.
Yeah, I mean, I do relate though to what you're saying very much so. So like I want to like give this caveat for the listeners, right? I am also someone who deals with things through logic. That's my way of like coping and getting through shit, is like I just logic the fuck out of all of it. Like I get very rational and I understand this happened for a reason and it's da 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 da, and that can be really helpful. I have learned through my own mental health journey and getting support and managing that. Sometimes we can over logic things to avoid dealing with the emotions. And so you have to recognize where that boundary is for you and like make sure it doesn't become a maladaptive coping mechanism. Like it can be helpful to get you through a moment and processing it, as long as you don't continue to do it to avoid dealing with the uncomfortable emotions, because you still need to go through that process of feeling the shitty feelings basically. So just want to give that caveat to listeners, because that's something I've learned in my own experience working in the mental health field. It's something that I've seen, but it can be really helpful. And I relate to you in the sense, like, right, all of my grandparents have passed, and like my latest grandparent that passed, I was really close with her. I was close with most of them, but in the moment, I saw she was at the end of her life. She had lived a really, really good life, and she was killing it even into her like early 80s. She was mowing the lawn. Like she was a badass lady. Um, and so when she died, I was really upset and I was really sad. But logically in my mind, I was like, she's having a lot of health issues. She wasn't able to speak because of some disorder she had developed. And that was probably really difficult for her to go from such a like thriving, functioning person to now not being able to like manage and take care of herself. And that's a process I think we're all going to have to go through at some point. Um, and she passed at home, like surrounded by family. I was able to get a call into her, that kind of thing. And so logically it was like, yes, this was probably just the natural ending of life for her. And I understand that. And glad it went the way that it did. But like now, right, I have moments, and this is the funny thing about grief, it comes up in really small ways. She and I used to cook together, and so she had these little ceramic things. She like made this ceramic chicken and this little onion guy that like hold utensils in the kitchen, and that's the thing that I got from her house when she passed. And I look at it all the time, and I'm like, and that's when I get a little sad and I think about grandma, and I'm like, okay, I'm having my emotions. So like logically I understood the situation, but I've had to let myself feel the things I need to feel. um when it's come to other losses, both of my parents have passed. So, and they were both really fucked up situations. So like my dad passed in 2015 from end stage liver failure. He struggled with alcoholism, and that was what was causing his liver to fail. And I've mentioned this on other episodes, my upbringing was just a lot of turmoil and trauma and conflict, because both of my parents struggled with alcoholism. And I am technically an only child, and that's another story for another day. But yeah, I ended up being the point person that was like in charge of all of his care. And so like I'd get and the way I found out he was sick, because he lied about a lot of it, was I got a call at 3 a.m. that he was in the ICU and he was intubated. And I didn't know that's how far along, like because we were at the time living in different states. So I was unaware. And if you guys aren't familiar, people who struggle with alcoholism tend to put up a lot of barriers and keep secrets and all of these things. And so, I'd like step into the situation of having to make all the decisions while he was unconscious and all of this. And then he passed. You want to know one of the first things that happened? So like I had been awake for over close to 48 hours in the hospital, because this was the last time that he was in the hospital. It was bad, and they took him in for a couple of emergency procedures to see if they could try to save him, because he had a really strong heart. So he passed. There was a big team of people that had been working on him. And, I was crying, and then like I kind of went numb and like totally in shock and zoned out. And I'm someone, right? I had to be a big, strong, brave face, make all these decisions, talk to the doctors. And so like this all went down, and I went to like go to the bathroom to like cry my eyes out. And one of the doctors from his team walked by, and she was like, "I'm so sorry. I just heard about your father." Said some really kind things. And she was getting on the elevator as she was saying this, and I was passing by. And so I just turned to her, and I was in total shock and like logic mode, right? And I just went, "Shit happens." I just kept walking.
Wow.
And then I went and cried in the bathroom, right? Like I didn't know how to respond, and that's now 8 years ago. And I still have like my moments of grief. And then last year, it's still actually very fresh. Last June, it's not even been a year, my mom also passed from very similar circumstances. And it was same situation where I was the main person talking to the doctors and pushing for care and things like that. And um hers was a combination of liver failure and cancer, that she just kind of ignored for a really long time. It was one of the more curable cancers actually, but um there was a lot of other complications because of her liver failure. And gosh, I think about the last 6 months of last year, and my memories, like it's a whirlwind. And I think, you know it is a different experience, because right, I've experienced the loss of a grandparent, I've experienced the loss of friends, of relationships. And I don't know, I just feel like grief never really ends. They the way you feel it is at different intensities. The loss of someone is like truly, truly permanent. um Right, I have an ex that was a really hard relationship for me to, and I even have like a friendship that was a really hard friendship for me to lose. And I still think about them. Like they come up and they pop up in my mind. And if I wanted to, I know I could reach out to them. Not that it would change anything or do anything or help anything. And so I don't. Um, but like there's always that small little flicker of like could possibly, and you have to, and I don't know if that's harder. Some of the door is permanently closed versus the door is pretty much closed. You'd really have to kick it open, like, get in there. But yeah, I think that's what the difference is in the loss, right? And then how you grieve it. But I think at the end of the day, the grieving still sucks. Like
Yeah,
you
like
can't change the circumstances.
100%. Like I'm really sorry for everything that you've had to go through, because it's a lot. Like it's a lot of emotion, a lot of like everything to process, and for even in like a short period of time as well. Like there's just been so many things. So I think, yeah, it's incredible the way you've handled it and dealt with the grief that you've obviously been going through, and still continue to do all of the things and run your business and all of these things. I think that's
Thanks.
amazing that you've done that. I guess for you, like what has grief felt like what does it actually has it felt different? I know you kind of touched on this just in what you were saying, but like has it felt different from like when you lost your dad to when you lost your mum, or when you lost your grandparents? Like has that grief felt different to you each
Oh
time?
yeah.
Always felt the same?
No, yeah, it's definitely different. I think grief in general, how I would describe it is like waves. Some of them are big and crashing and they consume you, and some of them are like just lapping at your feet, but they're never fully gone. Like you're always standing in the water no matter what, and it's just there. And I think like grief with like my grandma, my grandparents, it was like the natural end cycle of their life. And I got to experience and do a lot of things with them. And so that is a little bit easier to process. and when I feel grief about them, it's like that moment of like a memory of something that like I get all like a little choked up and oh, I miss them. With my parents, it's a little bit more complicated just because of our relationships and how complicated the relationships were. And like if I'll be real honest, right? Like my dad was so my parents, just really brief overview, they were married for 7 years before they had me. They had me, things all went to shit. My mom got kicked out of the house when I was like 6, and that was by my dad's doing that I didn't learn. My dad told me other things that I had to like learn different narratives later on. But he was the more functioning alcoholic out of the two. She could have a drink and you'd immediately know she was drinking. Him, he could carry around a cup of vodka all day and you never know. It just, he became a mean person. Um, and so my relationships were really complicated. My mom was never really my mom, and I was always angry at her as a kid because I could hear that she was drinking, and I was always mad that she was choosing alcohol over me and not parenting, like being the mother that I needed. And then there's a lot of stuff happening in the background, lots of nasty divorce things between my mom and dad. And then my dad, although I know he deeply loved me, but he did some really up shit, and how he he presented it and how he pushed me, and he was aggressive in a lot of ways, and there was physical abuse and lots of screaming and emotional mental trauma and stuff like that. But I had a closer relationship with my dad, so when he passed, I felt like the only person in the world that cared about me was gone. My mom, I feel like, and there's a lot of answers with my dad that will never be solved. He will never feel like I'll never get to see if he could ever been better because he was sober for the last 13 months of his life. He had to be, like, he had no choice. My mom, our relationship got better over the years in adult life. I had to set a lot of boundaries. She did finally come around to talking to me about a lot of things, but she never dealt with her shit. And so she continued to drink. She was unhappy in her life, and I could see that, and there was nothing that I could do about it. And I was just moving back to the US right when all of this went down. Like I've been gone for 6 years, right? I mean, I'd come back for holidays and things like that. And then prior to that, I was living in another state. Again, I'd come back for holidays and things, but I was coming back to Chicago. I got off a plane, and then I spent the next 30 days in the hospital, at the end of which she died. So like, it just so happened that the timing of like when she went in the hospital and all this was going down lined up right with me coming back. And even now, I'm angry. Like, I'm angry that she didn't try hard enough. I'm angry that the potential of what our relationship could have been now that I was back in the vicinity is no longer. But again, in my mind, like, you like to hope for the best, right? After how many years of behavior that she hasn't changed, would she have really stopped her drinking? Like, would our relationship have changed on the other than the surface level and like the small bits of progress that we made? And so the grief is I'm in very different stages of it, right? I'm still, and everyone, I don't know if you guys know this, they say the different stages of grief are sadness, anger, denial, acceptance, and then I think there's like one or two other ones in there, I can't remember. And it's not linear. And if you get to one, that doesn't mean you pass the level and you're now on to the next one. Like, you can always go back. And it's interesting over the years, the way that my grief has been for my dad is some years it's okay, some years it's really, really hard. But like with my grandma, that's just like the low hum, like the lapping water at my feet. It's the bigger waves that come crashing now and again, I think, for those bigger losses. And I've even felt a lower level, still a pretty big wave, but a lower level with like the loss of certain relationships with people who are still alive, friends, um, exes, and even like chapters. Like right now, I'm grieving the loss of my travel life. I've been living a very different lifestyle the last 6 years, and I've come home for various reasons, and it's hard to grasp, and it's like a whole different type of loss. So I don't know, it's always a hum in the background. And that's why that saying, like, be kind to everyone around you because you never know what they're going through. This is a lot of what people go through, not just the loss of people, but the loss of, the what's happening in their life and who they are. And so, yeah, man, be kind, because it's hard out here. Being an adult is hard. Growing up is hard.
It is. And it's things that like you don't necessarily learn how to deal with until you're in the moment dealing with them as well. So
Yeah.
it's like all you can really do is go off of how you feel in that moment in time. And like you say, at different moments you're going to feel in different ways, in which case you're going to respond to those emotions differently.
Yeah.
What has been your experience of like how you've coped with some of the losses that you've been through? Like, has there been, like, I know, like you say, there's not going to be a one size fits all box of like, here's your mechanisms, off you go. Like, but what has worked, what has helped you, and like what has been the thing that's really allowed you to feel more at peace, or more I don't know what the right word is, like a bit more like calm about anything that you've been going through, I guess? Because I can imagine that if you're going through grief, like if you're having those feelings, it's maybe very similar to how you feel when like you're having like a really severe anxiety attack and you've got all of the thoughts, emotions going on in your head, and obviously then you have coping mechanisms to get that anxiety away. I can only imagine that the strong waves of grief are similar to that. So what kind of things do you do to help you cope with those things?
Yeah, I guess this is an episode of Kelsey being honest and raw and all of her shit.
We love the honesty. I think though, because these are real conversations that, and like you've obviously you've gone through a lot and you've experienced a lot, and actually there's probably so many other people that are experiencing very similar situations. In fact, I could name 3 people in my life that have experienced very similar situations to you. And I think unless people talk about their experiences, and obviously not everyone feels comfortable, so I really appreciate you for sharing your experiences and being so honest and open. But I think a lot of people bottle these feelings up and they think that no one understands, and this is all part of TINAH, right? We want to destigmatize the conversations that people are having and make the conversation more fluid. So I really appreciate you giving us your honest thoughts and opinions and everything.
No, of course. I mean, like you said earlier, right? Like we are not really taught how to grieve any aspect of stuff, whether it's, death, identity, whatever it is. But I do think that we can learn, we can be prepared. So like having these conversations is really helpful. So in terms of, how to actually cope with grief, I think there are definitely concrete tools for it, but I think there are 3 phases of different types of coping. There's the immediate phase of right after that loss happens. There is the like next few weeks after that loss happens, and then there's long-term coping. There's long-term dealing with it. So this is where I was going to go with, like, I'll be really raw and honest here. I pride myself on my self-control and my discipline because of my parents and their alcoholism. I'm very hyper aware in my behaviors with alcohol, and like I don't have a drinking problem. I don't get me wrong, I like alcohol. Like I like a good whiskey, I like a good wine, that kind of thing. But even from a young age, I've been really hyper aware around my habits with alcohol, right? Like I won't, like when I was younger and I was in my party phase, like I wouldn't drink more than 2 days in a row. And like even if it was just one beverage, won't do it. And then like I was very careful about, because I didn't want to develop a pattern or a habit around drinking. I never wanted to cope with uncomfortable feelings with alcohol. The only time in my life that I have coped with alcohol was immediately after my parents' passing. Like immediately after. The emotions are so raw and so intense, and like especially my circumstances were a little bit different because I was turned on and I was in the hospital dealing with doctors, making decisions. I was sleep deprived, like all these things leading up to their death, that it was like it happened and I was still like it's just a huge shock, and it's a lot of energy that's happening. I think I pretty much downed 1.5 bottles of wine or 2 bottles of wine after my dad passed, and I slept for about a day and a half. After my mom passed, I came home and did a couple tequila shots. with my boyfriend. And so I'm not advocating for this as a healthy coping mechanism. I know my boundaries with alcohol. I know how I'm very good at saying when and no and all those things in those moments. And I think a lot of people do this. Like after a big breakup, they go out with their friends and they have drinks, and a friend comes over and they have drinks. It's something that we naturally, I think, do because the emotions are so big and hard to handle. Um, and so that's like the immediate coping that I did. The few weeks after that, it was more so about really just like giving myself space and gentleness to cry. I wasn't trying to change anything. I wasn't trying to actively process anything. It was just, I would sleep. I would try to be around others that like I knew who could give me like, attention and things like the support, not attention, but like the love and support that I needed. I'd cry whenever I needed to cry. I'd go through old pictures, stuff like that, right? Like whatever you need to feel what you need to feel and like let it out. And then the long-term coping for me looked a lot like I'm big on breath work, right? So if I'm like struggling to still deal with the emotions, that journaling was quite big, and a big part of the journaling very specified. I wrote letters. I wrote letters to my dad. Um, with my mom, I haven't necessarily done that. I'm still very much so in the raw phase of that because it's not even been a year. And I kind of threw myself into work a little bit. I mean, I had like my initial kind of breakdown and letting myself feel and stuff, but I've been quite busy with work, which is why I'm really looking forward to this next holiday. Um, and I had a really good friend of mine from my travels. She came to stay with us and she's been here with us for a few months. And like that was huge help to have like a supportive community. Like that was a really big thing. But I mean, there's lots of other ways to cope. I mean, I did journaling. I really made sure I was moving my body and exercising. Um, like I said, focusing on rest, having that community, doing activities in their memory, right? So like years down the road. So unfortunately, my dad, he passed in March and his birthday's in March. So March is always the theme of gym, which I'm sure he would fucking love. And we would do like I learned how to marinate meat and stuff from him and cook like steaks. And so we would do steaks and we'll watch a bunch. I'm a huge movie person because of him. So we'll watch like all the old movies that I grew up with that I love, like Fifth Element, Alien, like all, any of the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, like all that good stuff. So I do things in honor and memory of him. Um, when I'm feeling really proud about certain things and I feel like my parents, like I will say my mom was one of the few people who I was really surprised, unabashedly like supported me starting a business, never questioned it, never, she would ask questions. She would give maybe some support and ideas. She's the one who opened my LLC for me, and she was a paralegal secretary, so she's very good with like the paperwork and stuff. Um, that was something that I will always forever be grateful for because people question when you open a business and you're being an entrepreneur, like what the hell are you doing? You don't have a real job, that kind of stuff. Um, so yeah, whenever I accomplish things that are pretty big, I like to say like, hey, I think of that of them in that moment, or I make a post about it on Facebook and I share my thoughts with others. As you can see, I'm very open to sharing things, but it's a lot of messy, raw emotions and thoughts. So that's my long-winded answers to that. There's 3 phases of it. What you do in each of those phases is different. And it's about leaning into the things that feel best for you and what will help you and are not, you're not avoiding emotions and you're not going too down the road with like those unhealthy coping mechanisms.
I like what you said about writing a letter. That's something that I feel like I often do, well, have learned to do whenever something is ending for me as well, like whether that's a relationship, whether that's a phase of my life, a period of my life. I feel like it really helps you to get all of your thoughts and feelings out onto paper, same as journaling, but I feel like sometimes a letter, because it's being very much addressed
Like
to a specific
direct.
Yeah. And I did, when I was in therapy a few years ago and I was really struggling with getting over a specific breakup that I'd been through, and she told me to write a letter. That was one of the things that she had said to me to do, was write a letter and get out everything that you need to say that maybe you weren't able to say because of circumstances at the time. And then we also practiced, is it called the Gestalt theory? Like where you actually read the letter out loud to somebody that isn't that person to try
Gestalt?
What is it called?
Is it Gestalt theory?
Yeah, something like that. Gestalt theory.
Yeah.
And it's like where you write the letter, or you think about what you want to say, and then you practice. So for example, I could come to you and read out my letter. It wouldn't be addressed, it's not to you, but I could read out my letter so that I'm actually feeling like I'm having that conversation with somebody as like some kind of like, I don't want to use the word closure because like you say, grief doesn't have an end date, but like you're kind of like getting out any emotions that might have been stuck somehow to do with like that specific situation. And that's something that I practiced in therapy when I was going through a loss of relationship and going through and processing the grief of that. And I feel like that really helped me get past some of the really strong emotions that I was feeling about that situation. So I really like what you said there about like that coping mechanism of writing a letter. I think that can be very powerful and very easy for somebody to do as well. I know that's really good. And I imagine as well, when you've obviously been going through some of these some of the things that you've been through, like I imagine it's very difficult when somebody's trying to support you to know what to say as well. So how would you, like, what advice would you give from someone that's been on the receiving end of people trying to support but maybe not giving you the best support, or like telling you the right things or saying the right things? Because it's very hard. It is hard to support somebody that's going through something, especially if you've never been through it yourself. I think that's really difficult. But obviously there are things that you can say that are better than others. So what advice would you give to somebody that maybe has somebody in their life that's grieving and they want to know how to support or what to say? Like, what would you suggest people do?
Gosh, this is a feisty answer for me because I've got my feelings about it. I think that a lot of people, they're there in the moment of loss. There's a lot of I'm sorry's, sorry for your loss, that kind of thing. And those are kind words. There's nothing wrong with those words. And they're all there. And it's kind of a whirlwind from when they pass to the actual funeral or the memorial or whatever it is that the procession that you have for someone. And then it all kind of just falls away and disappears right after that. Once it's done, everyone goes back to being about their lives. And it's the people who are closest to that person who are dealing with things on a daily basis that are still they're just left holding the shit bag, basically. And it's natural. I'm not saying people do this out of anger or malicious or anything like that. I think people just go back. It's hard to deal with those heavy feelings all the time. So they go back to their daily life, they distract, they have their moments that they process their grief and cope with it. But for the people who are really close to the situation, it's like everyone up and disappears and they're not thinking about that anymore. And this is still very much so like your world. And if you do a lot of people say things like everything happens for a reason. They're in a better place now. At least you have other blah, 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 or, time heals all wounds, like that kind of thing. My favorite one is, I hate it. Let me know if you need anything. Let me know if you need anything. And the irony is that like, I do that to people. Like if someone's going through a hard time, there's not anything that I can do. I'll just be like, let me know if you need anything. I think like maybe you were having a hard week 2 weeks ago and I said to you, let me know if there's anything I can do. And in those moments, what's helpful, I would say, especially that one, because that's the one that gets me the most. Let me know if you need anything. I've just spent so much time thinking and processing and managing, putting together this funeral, like organizing all these back end details and my parents in particular, dealing with everything that led up to them passing in the hospital and making all these decisions, rather than asking, what do I need? Or let me know if you need anything, just show up and do it. Just bring me food. I'm unfortunately now I'm gluten and dairy intolerant, but lots of people know that like, it's not that hard to find replacements. Just bring me some stuff to feed me. Make sure that like the basics of everyday life that I would have to think about normally, because as we know, adulting is really hard. Like making sure you're doing your laundry, that the dishes in the sink aren't piling up, that you've got enough food. And I think like in that first week or two after a loss of someone, if you can, bring by some food, stop over, and they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about it, but help them clean up the house. Like just kind of tidy up for them and help them out. Do a load of laundry, something. Um, maybe they want to, maybe they need to get out and they need you to help. It depends. You have to, your people close enough to say like, what do you really need? And if someone's like, you know what, I want to stay here and drink this bottle of tequila, I'm only going to do it tonight, but will you come over and drink it with me? Then like they're there with you to do it. Right. Or I just want to lay in bed and I want to watch movies. Do you want to come over and just watch movies with me and not talk about it? Right. Some people will be more clear on what they need. And if they aren't able to vocalize it, then just doing the basics makes a huge difference. And then things to actually say, right? Like instead of everything happens for a reason, you can just acknowledge, some things are just really shit and you need to hold on when it happens. Know that you've got support here, or they're in a better place now. I can't just say, I can't imagine what you're feeling. I'm so sorry this happened, right? At least you have other da 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 da. Just say it's okay that this feels unbearable right now. I want you to know I'm here. Some days will be better than others and some days will be rough. Take it one moment at a time. I know that's not the answer that you want to hear, but just know that I see your pain and I'm here if you need it. Right. So I think that's what I would encourage people to do to help to support other people who are grieving. Right. If you can get a sense of what they need, if you know them well enough, then just show up and do it. And if you don't know them well enough, doing the basics of, I brought some food, I brought some sweets, I brought some stuff over to help with the house. Let me take the dogs out for a walk. They haven't been out for a walk in a couple of days, right? What can they do to just support in that moment is always really helpful. And I'm very lucky that my close people have done that, but right, they have to go to work. So they're not here with me the whole time. And so like people have to go back to their stuff. And then I've had a lot of people who, that's why it's the one I hate. Let me know if you need anything. It's like, I'm sad and I'm depressed already. And I like asking for extra help makes me feel like a burden. Like, why am I going to ask you for anything?
I think just as you were talking now, I thought of a few things. Like, I feel like when somebody is going through something difficult, like a difficult time, period of loss, like whatever experience you're going through that is hard, I feel like often the people that should be there to support you, or like could be there to support you, often aren't, because it brings up for them some kind of uncomfortable emotion that they can't deal with or aren't ready to deal with. And I have seen that present in so many different situations, and I just feel like our society is not trained, and we've spoken about this before, trained to process emotion and handle their emotions, handle other people's emotions. Like, there really isn't enough resource around it. And like, I actually went on a beach walk this morning and I was thinking about this from a different situation in my life that's happening at the moment. And I was thinking about like the fact that like how much self-development work I've had to personally do to get to the point that I'm in now, to be able to analyze my own emotions and process my own shit.
Yeah.
I still have work to do. I'm still not there. The work's never going to end. But I just thought, like, if I'm somebody that's done a lot of self-development work on myself, imagine how many people haven't done that work and how much unprocessed emotion, or like how challenging it is for some people to handle their emotions, particularly in moments like this when their closest friends or family is in need. Like, anybody that does show up for you in the right way, I feel like is a very emotionally stable person, and also quite brave, because like they're probably feeling uncomfortable talking to you about it in some way, because they don't know from your side like how difficult, like they're not a mind reader, like they can't see into your soul, like they don't know exactly like how you're coping or processing, or like what you're actually thinking, unless you verbalized it. And I think it's like it's like a borderline, isn't it? Like, you never want to say the wrong thing to someone, so then you just don't say anything at all. And then
Right.
if you do say something and it might come across as the wrong thing, you're then going to go into your own emotions and be like, oh my God, like I said this XYZ. Like, I feel like it's a really difficult thing to sometimes for people that haven't got the emotional maturity to be able to deal with. So yeah, I don't know if you've like had any experiences where somebody has given a really good level of support, and you can see that because they have got the emotional maturity, or if someone that hasn't, for example. Like, I feel like I'm somewhere in the middle where I know generally how to support people, but sometimes I am 100% guilty, exactly what you said, of being like, let me know if you need something. And I can imagine that's either because I've got my own shit going on, or I'm not quite able to support that person because of my own unprocessed emotions.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point that you bring up, and I'm glad that you did. And right, I'm in some raw emotions with like recent losses and things like that. And so I have a lot of anger around stuff.
Understandable.
But when I'm logical about it, I can't, and I've done obviously a lot of personal work on myself, and I come from the psych field because I've had training on things. I do have to remind myself, right? Everyone has their own shit going on. Everyone struggles to deal with their emotions in their own ways. There's a lot of people who don't know how to deal with it at all. And so I have to remind myself of that. And I think, to be honest, like what you and I are doing, this is why I jumped on this project that's now turned into a full-blown business, because I think having the conversations the way that we're having conversations and getting other people to come in and share their stories and have conversations about it in and of itself is like a really good step towards people learning how to either manage their own shit or to help others who they might need to give a little extra love and support to. And so it's always going to be a work in progress, as they say. So it's just helpful to remember that. And then I hope anyone who's listening to this will take away, might not be the best with words, or you might not be able to really cope with your own emotions in the situation, but you can bring over a burger and fries. You can bring over some chicken noodle soup, or help someone do a load of laundry and clean up their dishes. And there's just some really basic stuff that to help. But yeah, it is helpful to remember that, because we're all human beings and life is really hard. So
It is, and everyone's going through something different ways of grieving something. But you're right, like we can all show up and do the bare minimum. It's just about trying to figure out what that minimum is for us, and like how we can best help, and like, but at least make the person going through the shit to feel like that you are trying. That's I think the main thing, isn't it? Like, if you can see that people don't try versus someone that at least is like, okay, they tried, even though they may have not done it in the best way, like they have actually just generally tried. And I think that's all you really ask from somebody. But
I'll just say this one caveat, because you said what's a really good example of someone who supported me. And I will have to say, my boyfriend, who I'm with him now, we started dating about a year ago, but I've known him for 20 years. So he knew my dad, he knew my mom quite well. He has done a fantastic job in the sense of, right, because we live together, and he's seen the different waves of grief. And like, he was there with me. He took tequila shots on the night that it happened. He took the day off of work the next day, and then like spent the weekend, with me. And then even in time after that, like whenever I would just break down and cry and be angry and say the things that I needed to say, just a really good job of letting me cry and really validating my feelings and be like, yeah, like, fuck that. That's, I'm swearing a lot and you're going to have to bleep this out. I'm sorry. But like, just kind of validating and being in the emotion with me, and not trying to fix it, not trying to calm it down and, get rid of it. He's just been really good about being there physically and then also emotionally. And I think like that's the best thing. And he stepped up. He would be like getting us dinners, right? He's a great cook, but in the moment he was having his own feelings too, but he was the one to go out and get us food and handle getting food for me with my gluten and dairy free, intolerances. And he handled all of that stuff. And that was really, really helpful. So that's just a basic example I just wanted to share, because I know we're going to be wrapping up. So
No, thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else you wanted to share at all on the subject before we kind of close?
no, but thanks for listening to all my woes, people. I hope it sheds some light on something for somebody, and anybody can relate, and
Very helpful.
just know you're not alone.
Exactly. I think everything you've said has been, thank you for sharing. Like I say, it's really great for you to put your honest opinions and stuff across. And like I say, I think it is helpful for anybody that is experiencing those feelings. Like sometimes you just don't know what to do with them, and listening to what somebody else does is going to help you in some way, shape or form. So I think one of the quotes that you pulled for one of our social media posts that's going to go out is I really like it. I'm just going to read it out just before we end.
Yeah.
Grief, I've learned, is really just love. It's all the love you want to give but cannot. All of that unspent love gathers in the corner of your eyes, the lump in your throat, and in the hollow part of your chest. Grief is love, just love with no place to go. And I think that's a really powerful statement, because it's 100% true. I think if you're feeling grief, it's because you lost something that you loved. So I think it's a really powerful quote, that one, and I just wanted to share that before we end. But thank you so much for listening to our episode today. If this resonated with you, please be sure to give us a like, and we would love to hear your feedback in the comments about what topics you'd like to hear more about. Don't forget to subscribe, follow us on socials, and join the community at timeisnothealer.com. All the details can be found in the episode description below. And remember, you hold the power to heal. Until next time, you've got this.